can recite the opening prayer together. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Very good. Welcome back. We continue our study of this Isha Upanishad. Every kind of text has its own flavor, as it were. The Bhagavad Gita has a very simple poetic style. The works of Sri Shankaracharya are many times very detailed and even didactic. This Isha Upanishad, as we've commented before, couldn't be more different than both of these kinds of texts. Where Shankara is very systematic, this Upanishad is absolutely non-systematic. Where the Bhagavad Gita is very simple and straightforward. The Isha Upanishad gives the rishis the opportunity to express their highest vision in a very mystical, elevated, inspired, poetic sense. So as we go through this text, we have to be ready for that kind of language. That's both the challenge of Upanishad and the beauty of Upanishad. The challenge is the very nature of the expressions being so lofty. But the beauty comes when we can penetrate and really understand what those rishis meant to convey. What we come to enjoy is something very profound. Just to set the stage for today's class, remember the opening verse said that those, and I'm going to go from the bottom up in that verse, those who turn their backs on conventional life. Remember, it ended up talking about renunciation. Those who turn their back on the conventional wisdom of finding happiness and contentment in the world, those people alone can discover the Ishvara who pervades the universe, the Ishvara, the reality, the truth, which is at the heart of everything. That was the opening verse. The second verse says, what about the second verse treated those who are unable or unwilling to turn their backs on the conventional wisdom? And so those who are still looking to find contentment and joy exclusively through worldly activities, what the second verse prescribed is, well, if you're going to be engaged in the world, at least you should do a lot of Vedic rituals. Why? For two reasons. One is by doing Vedic rituals, you can incur a lot of punya karma, good karmas, which will help you in this life and your next life. The second reason, which is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, by performing lots of Vedic rituals, the more time you spend doing Vedic rituals, the less time you do other stupid things, and it helps keep you out of trouble. We joked about that in the prior class. But that verse concluded with the admonition that even if you live an incredibly pious life, staying out of trouble, performing all the Vedic rituals, it said the best you could hope for is to live 100 years. That's the best case. And of those 100 years, how many of those 100 years are actually pleasant and joyful? Think about the last 30 or 40 years. The last 30 years, we'll say, are not going to be so fun as our bodies get very old and decrepit and painful. So 100 years of struggle and suffering, and then you die, and that's the best case scenario. That's the best you can hope for. That's what we saw in the prior class. And that brings us then to the third verse, which is where we will begin today. So what about those who perform all the Vedic rituals, They live to be 100 years old. When they die, by the time they die, they've accrued a lot of punya karmas, which means they should have some excellent situation for their rebirth. They should either have a very good human rebirth, or they could even be born into some kind of swarga loka, some kind of heavenly abode. And you remember, of course, that in the Hindu tradition, heaven, unlike the biblical traditions, the biblical traditions which hold that heaven and hell are eternal states, the Hindu tradition holds that any kind of heaven or hell is a temporary state. It's like a lifetime. Based on your accumulated good deeds, you get a lifetime in heaven. Based on your accumulated papa karmas, you get a lifetime in hell. There's no such thing as eternal heaven or hell. So, the second verse presented this best case scenario of living 100 years, not making mistakes, doing only good actions, and in fact doing lots of Vedic rituals, and perhaps then getting to Swarga Loka, going to heaven. And verse 3 then comments on going to heaven. Going to heaven sounds so nice until you see this next verse. I don't know, some kind of joke just comes into my. I remember my guru commenting on this. He says you go to heaven, and he's using the kind of the biblical imagery of heaven. So you're floating around in the clouds, and somebody's playing a harp, and you're just sitting around and just. He said, "How boring." That was his impression of that biblical image of heaven. But here, in his Upanishad, we get a very different vision of heaven in verse 3. Repeat after me, and I'm going to be using the swaras that are part of this text. Asurya namate loka, asurya namate loka, andhena tamasavritaha, andhena tamasavritaha, tagamste pretyabhigachanti, tagamste pretyabhigachanti, yeke chahatmahano janaha, yeke chahatmahano janaha. So what about those heavenly domains that can be attained? Well, the Rishi here says, te lokaha. So up there, right? Yeah. Te lokaha. Let me use my commentary here. Te lokaha, those worlds, those heavenly domains are asuryaha, demonic. What? Demonic? He says they are andhena tamasa avritaha. Those heavenly worlds are avritaha, covered. Covered with what? Tamasa, with tamas, darkness. What kind of tamas? Andha tamas, dark darkness. As if darkness isn't bad enough, dark darkness. Those heavenly worlds are covered. Heavenly worlds mean swarga. The best case scenario of living a pious life and dying with lots of punya karma and going to swarga. Here the Rishi says those worlds are covered in darkness. They are in fact asuryaha, demonic. How could he make such a judgment? Well, first of all, covered by darkness, you already know that darkness is often a metaphor for ignorance. So if you're ignorant of the ultimate reality while you live this life, when you go to heaven, do you get enlightened? You get enlightened when you get knowledge. Heaven, swarga, is understood as a domain of enjoyment. As a result of all your good karmas in this life, you go to heaven, and we could even define Swarga Loka as not a place, but Swarga Loka as a lifetime of pure enjoyment. Does that sound like your life? So we know very clearly we are not in Swarga. This is not a life of pure enjoyment. Nor is this a life of pure suffering. A life of pure suffering is what we mean by naraka, hell. They're not places. They're not necessarily places, but rather a lifetime. A lifetime of pure suffering is hell. A lifetime of pure enjoyment is heaven. But a lifetime of pure enjoyment, you're still stuck with ignorance. The ignorance which is at the root of reincarnation. Now, bear in mind that according to the doctrine of karma, which is a huge topic, you'll understand that we can't explain the whole doctrine of karma right now. It'll take 2-3 classes. But a proper understanding of the doctrine of karma tells us that this process of going from life to life to life to life, one after another, continues until one destroys the ignorance which is at the root of human existence. That means ignorance of your true nature as Atma, being non-separate from Brahman. Knowledge of reality, knowledge of truth, knowledge of God, if we want to use that kind of terminology. So, in a life, in that best case scenario, 100 years of Vedic rituals, there's no knowledge. Then you go to heaven as a result, there's still no knowledge. Which means, when your life in heaven comes to an end, and it does, right? Every life is based on accumulated karmas. This life is based on accumulated karmas. We've accumulated enough karma to keep us going, we hope, for 70 plus years. We don't know. We hope that our karmas will keep us going for a while. Then, when you go to Swarga, suppose, then your life in Swarga is also determined by accumulated good karmas, in this case, but those accumulated karmas are always finite. When the accumulated karmas that led to this life come to an end, we die and get born again. If you go to Swarga, when the accumulated karmas that took you to Swarga Loka come to an end, when they get exhausted, experience exhausts karmas. So when the experience of pleasure and joy in heaven exhausts all the accumulated karmas, then that life in heaven comes to an end and you get reborn. And then what? Try again. Best case scenario, you come back to this human realm, but there's no rule. You could be born, but there really is no rule. And again, we'd have to study thoroughly the law of karma to understand this. But it's entirely possible to be born in Swarga one lifetime and to be born as a cockroach in the next. It's entirely possible. There's no rule that prohibits that. Anything is possible because it's all in the sphere of ignorance. As long as that ignorance is present. Anything can anything can happen. So tan te pretya abhigachanti. Te, those people, this is the second line, those people who have lived that pious life, lived 100 years, done lots of Vedic rituals, what happens to them? Te, they, pretya, when they die, abhigachanti, they go. Where do they go? Tan, to them. To what? To those lokas. To te lokaha, to those lokas which here are called asuryaha, demonic lokas. You can probably understand the darkness of ignorance. That makes sense. It's kind of logical. Even when you go there, you're still under the effect of ignorance. How could you possibly asuryaha? I'll just share with you some of Sri Shankara writes this very, very clear and fairly concise commentary on the Isha Upanishad. Of course, Isha is one of the 10 Upanishads that Sri Shankara selected to write commentaries on. Sri Shankaracharya's commentaries are perhaps the most brilliant scholarly writings that you'll find perhaps not just in Hinduism, but in any tradition. The works of Sri Shankara are amazing. So just to show you his thoroughness and how nicely he can explain even something strange as calling heaven demonic, asuryaha. This is how Shankara explains it. He says, asuryaha paramatma bhavam advayam apekshya. He says, with regard to your true nature as Satchidananda Atma, which is absolutely non-dual, with respect to that, devadayaha api asuraha. He says, even the condition of the gods is equivalent to the condition of a Rakshasa in comparison to the nature of your true self. In comparison to the nature of your true self, even the status of a deva is as good as the status of an asura in comparison to the fullness, completeness, and perfection of your true self. So this is how we can understand that term, asuryaha. Now, the next statement, the last statement here, is very shocking. Actually, before we go there, te lokaha karma palani. This is Sri Shankara's comment. Te lokaha, those lokas, those heavenly realms, are karma palani. They are the results of your prior actions. This is so solid. You know, when you may not appreciate this at all. I was actually raised in a biblical tradition, so I have some background in this. If you go through the Bible and I remember as a little child, let me say that. As a little child, I had religion classes taught by nuns. Very interesting. And those nuns would teach us all about Jesus and this and that, and of course about heaven and hell. Suppose I were to ask a question, how do we know that there's such a place as heaven? How do we know there's such a place as hell? And the stock answer is, you don't have to know, you just have to believe. Bas, that's it. Don't ask. In fact, I remember being told not to ask questions. I was told by a religion teacher, a nun, don't ask questions. This isn't something to discuss. You just have to believe this. Now, this is the biblical approach to heaven and hell. Here we're talking about heaven. Is heaven, from a Hindu standpoint, merely a matter of belief? Well, Shankara just gives a simple reason. Te lokaha, those realms are karma palani. They are the fruits of your actions. And that's what I described in brief before. That is, our concept of swarga is not a particular place, but a lifetime of pure enjoyment which comes about as a result of your accumulated good karmas. And this actually makes sense. If we were to take enough time to go through the whole doctrine of karma, you'd see that it makes perfect sense, and it's not a matter for blind faith. So the traditions are so utterly different when it comes to their approach to heaven and hell. Okay, now the last comment in this verse. Yeke, talking about those who, pretya, having died, abhigachanti, they go to those lokas. What about them? Yeke, they are those, ye kecha, they are those, ye janaha, those people who go to those heavenly realms. This is almost shocking. It is not almost shocking, it's shocking. Those who go to those realms are atmahanaha, suicides. What? Atmaha means one who kills oneself. Atmahanaha here is plural in number. Those who go to heaven kill themselves. What in the world is he saying here? Why would the Rishi use such harsh language? Good. Remember the context. We're talking about those who fail to turn their backs on seeking contentment merely through worldly life, which means those who fail to make the effort to gain spiritual wisdom, to gain atmajnanam, self-knowledge, those who fail to make the effort for moksha, for liberation, for enlightenment. If you fail to make that effort for enlightenment, then when you die, you get reborn. In the Hindu tradition, we keep talking about you get born again and again and again and again and again. But as my guru says, that's an overly optimistic way of interpreting the law of karma. Because it's equally true to say that Hindus believe that you die again and again and again and again and again. Life after life after life sounds really good. Death after death after death after death is equally true and doesn't sound so good. But it's equally true. By failing to make that effort to come out of samsara, samsara means the cycle of life and death, the cycle of suffering. Samsara. Those who fail to make that effort to come out of samsara condemn themselves to die again and again and again. Is it not so? In that sense, they're condemning themselves to death. Atmaha. They are figuratively committing suicide. This also calls to mind I forgot to bring, I was going to bring that other text. There's a famous passage in the Kena Upanishad, which touches on the same concept here. And I forgot to bring the text. And unfortunately, it's not 100% up here in my head. Te satyam veda. The only expression that comes, which is the important one, is mahati vinashtihi. Let me paraphrase the first two lines of that verse. I'm sorry I didn't bring it. Do you have the Kena Upanishad? Oh, thank you. Oh, wonderful. That's better than I expected. Good. Let's get the right verse here. Yeah. Good, thank you. This is the second section, verse 5, which will really illustrate how the Rishi can use this language. By failing to pursue moksha, it's equivalent to suicide. So this similar verse comes in the Kena Upanishad. Iha chet avedit. Suppose someone, in this life, avedit, discovers that truth, discovers the truth of oneself. Ata satyam asti, then there is truth. If one discovers reality, if one destroys that ignorance that covers us, ata satyam asti, then there is truth. Not iha avedit, but suppose someone fails to discover that ultimate truth in this life. Then what? Mahati vinashtihi. Then there is infinite loss. This needs to be explained. There's a little bit of economics. If If you invest $10 in something, how much can you lose? $10. So the amount you can gain or lose depends on the amount at stake. In conventional life, what is at stake is your life. Your life is at stake. At best, you can have a wonderful life. At worst, you can suffer a lot. And in either event, you die. So that is, from a worldly standpoint, you've invested one lifetime. But suppose we change our perspective and consider that the true self, Satchidananda Atma, is unborn, uncreated, unchanging, therefore eternal. Not only eternal, but it has no edge, has no limit, has no boundary. It's limitless. So that which is timeless, eternal, limitless, full, and complete is that which is at stake here. What is at stake in spiritual life is infinite. In worldly life, what is at stake is finite, this lifetime. But from a spiritual standpoint, what is at stake, so to speak, as if it were an investment, what is at stake, what is invested potentially, is something of infinite value. If you discover this truth, the truth of Satchidananda Atma, being non-separate from Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, this is our very Vedantic language, if you discover absolute truth, the ultimate truth, what do you gain? What you gain is infinite. On the other hand, if you fail to gain this absolute truth, how much is your loss? Wow. Can you imagine an investment with an infinite loss? That's what's being described here. Mahati vinashtihi. Bhuteshu bhuteshu vichitya dhiraha. Pretya asman lokan amrataha bhavati. So the wise ones, having discerned the reality in all things, pretya, when they leave this life, pretya asmat lokat, when they leave this life, amrataha bhavati. They don't get reborn. They remain immortal. They remain, to use some loose language, they remain non-separate from God, to use some loose language. So this is a radically different path. Worldly path, the most you can gain is a good life. The most you can lose is have a horrible life and then you die. But from a spiritual standpoint, you have the opportunity to strive for this highest knowledge, this highest vision, which then culminates not in a happy lifetime in heaven, but it culminates in amrita, culminates in immortality, culminates in what we would call videha mukti. In the Vedantic tradition, we differentiate between two different kinds of moksha or mukti, liberation or freedom. We talk about jivan mukti, a kind of liberation you enjoy while alive. This is the enlightened person. This is a saint, someone who has discovered this truth and therefore is freed from ignorance and is freed from suffering here in this life. This condition we call jivan mukti. Such a person is called a jivan mukta. We also have, then when the jivan mukta dies, then what? When another person dies, then they get, well, to use our other language, when another person dies, they die again, and again, and again, and again, which is the truth of it. When the Jivan Mukta dies, because they're freed from ignorance which binds them to their karmas, they are freed from all karmas, they are never born again. They remain boundaryless, limitless, full, and complete without the impediment of any kind of body or mind whatsoever. This is a state of kaivalya, a state of absolute blessedness. This condition then we call videha mukti, the condition of being freed in the absence of a physical body. So that's what the rishis are talking about here. Thank you so much. So, final comment here before we go on to the next verse. Here we are studying the Vedas. The Vedas which talk extensively about the need for performing rituals. In fact, if you were to go through the Vedas, it sounds silly, the Vedas by weight. 90% of the Vedas would be concerning rituals. 10% of the weight, I'm being a little facetious, but you get the idea. By weight, 10% of the Vedas is dedicated to spiritual wisdom. By weight, 90% of the Vedas is dedicated to Vedic rituals, karmas. Then don't you find it surprising that in this verse, it says that those who perform karmas and go to heaven, their achievement is asurya, demonic. Which is to say that the Veda criticizes the very rituals they enjoin. Correct. Absolutely correct. And this puzzles many people. In one section, the Vedas will go on praising these rituals and encouraging you. In fact, they'll say, if you don't do these rituals, you're in trouble. If you don't do these rituals, this can happen, that can happen, that can happen, so therefore you better do these rituals. It's like that Satyanarayan Katha. If you don't do it, look what can happen. Silly stories. Sorry, going completely irrelevant aside, but makes some point. It seems very surprising that the Vedas, which are 90% karma by weight, so to speak, then in an Upanishad like the Isha Upanishad, and not only here but in many places, the same Veda, remember, Upanishad is Veda, the same Veda that enjoins Vedic rituals, the same Veda says that they're useless. Now, on the surface, this sounds self-contradictory, unless you understand two principles. One is no book or text or scripture is homogeneous. There are chapters or sections. Anytime you pick up a book, there are chapters, right? And sometimes the chapters will have subheadings. That means that a book is composed of different topics. The Vedas are no different. The Vedas are composed of different parts, different sections. In our very first class, we went through that. We won't return to that topic today. But you remember, various sections. Now, this part you already know. The second point that has to be remembered is that different sections of the Vedas are actually intended to be studied by different people. It's like a book that has introductory stuff at the beginning and very advanced stuff at the end. If you're a beginner, you read the beginning chapters. If you're not a beginner, you may turn immediately to the latter chapters. So the point is that a single book can address multiple audiences. different groups of people. I'm using simple English, but I'm explaining a very profound Vedic principle known as adhikari bheda. Adhikari bheda. There is a bheda, a difference, a difference among adhikaris, among qualified students. So according to the adhikari, according to the qualification of the person, there is a bheda, there's a difference in subject matter. So let's be very clear right now. If your goal is to live a happy life and to find as much happiness and contentment as possible in this life and to avoid as much suffering in this life as possible and prepare yourself for whatever comes in the next life, if that's your goal, don't read the Isha Upanishad. This text is not for you. This is the wrong chapter of the Veda to study. If your goal is to live a comfortable, content life, you should read and study and practice the other parts of the Veda that enjoin rituals, because that pious life with lots of rituals is much more effective in ensuring that your day-to-day activities will be very nice. You remember in Vedic times, their worldview was if you did these particular rituals, there would be specific things to happen to you in your life which would be beneficial. You do these rituals, you get good crops. You do those rituals, you get the birth of a son, etc., etc. That was the Vedic vision. So, if your goal in life is to find as much happiness in worldly life as possible, don't study the Isha Upanishad. Go to the Karma Kanda, the section with all the rituals. On the other hand, we've now come to the Jnana Kanda. You remember our introduction in the first class. In this Jnana Kanda, it's addressing a different audience. It's addressing those who have recognized the limitations of worldly life. It addresses those who truly want to discover something more, that limitless, infinite self. And to encourage you in the right direction, this Upanishad and many others say, you need not bother with those rituals. Since your goal is a purely spiritual goal and not a worldly goal, therefore, you need not worry about those Vedic rituals. That's what's being said here. It's said elsewhere. It's said very famously in a Taittiriya Upanishad. Na karmana na prajaya dhanen. It says right there, na karmana, not by Vedic rituals. Amritatva manashuhu. They can gain immortality. Some people can gain immortality. Na karmana, not by Vedic rituals. We won't bother with that passage. So that was a final comment on this verse, to recognize that the same Veda that enjoins Vedic rituals, in this section, it actually criticizes. Well, I guess you could call that criticism. To call heaven a demonic state covered with ignorance sounds like criticism. Let's call it as it looks. It's criticism. All right. Let's proceed to the next. So having talked about those who are still on the worldly path for the last two verses, now we come back to what is discovered by those who turn their backs on conventional worldly life. This is like back in the first verse. Those who turn their backs on conventional worldly life, those who seek that ultimate truth. And we'll see that in verse 4. Anehe jarekam, anehe jarekam, manaso javihiyo, manaso javihiyo, Naina Deva, Naina Deva, Ahapnuvan Purvamarshata, Ahapnuvan Purvam Harshata, Tadhavato Nyan, Tadhavato Nyan, Atyeheti Tishtata, Atyeheti Tishtata, Tasmin Napo, Tasmin Napo, Mahatarishwaha Dadhati, Mahatarishwaha Dadhati. All right. We get more poetry. It gets very poetic. Just the first quarter, you get the... I mentioned how this Upanishad is the antithesis of systematic. And you get that idea in the very first line here. Anejata ekam manasaha javiyaha. Ekam, that one. Which one? The one that, as in the first verse, the one that covers the world, the one that is the truth of all. That one Brahman, which is the reality because of which everything exists, which is the reality because of which you and I exist, the reality of Satchidananda Atma. Ekam, that one, anejata, without moving, anejata, that one without moving, manasaha javiyaha, is faster than the mind. That one without moving is faster than the mind. You get this, it's poetry. You can begin to get this sense. That one without moving is faster than the mind. Now, what do you mean? Faster than the mind means what? How long does it take? So suppose you have friends in Mumbai. How long does it take to get to Mumbai? You go to Newark, you get on, you have to wait 3 hours for the flight, you go through security, all this nonsense. Finally, you get on the plane, you go to Mumbai. It's what, 8, how long does it take? 16 hours, okay. So in fact, you most of the flights will stop in Amsterdam or someplace, and then you get down and you wait some more, and then you get back on the plane. You finally end up in Mumbai in the middle of the night, and you have to go through customs and all this nonsense. And and so finally, after all of this, you finally, and then in the middle of the night, you got to get some taxiwala and go to your friend's place. Whatever. It's you've done it many times. How tedious is that? How long, that friend that you're going to visit in Mumbai, how long does it take for your mind to reach your friend in Mumbai? You just think of your friend. Your mind is there. Your mind can travel that, 8,000 miles, whatever it is, in an instant. It takes a long time to transport our bodies, but our minds are so fast. Your mind how far is Mars? Your mind can go there. How far are the distant galaxies? It takes light, thousands of years, millions of years, to travel from distant galaxies. You look up at a star that's 1 million light years away, and your mind travels that 1 million light years of distance instantly. That's how fast your mind is. And ekam, this one, is manasaha jahiyaha. It's faster than the mind. This one is faster. How can it possibly be faster than the mind? The answer, of course, is it's already there. This one is already in Mumbai. This one is already on Mars. This one is already present in the distant galaxies as the reality because of which they exist. Ekam, that one pervades the universe, or better said, that one is a reality because of which the universe exists. Therefore, it's already there. In that sense, it is manasaha, javiyaha. It is faster than the mind, it's already there. And in spite of that, it is anejata, without wavering, without moving. But now, having explained the metaphor, now it makes perfect sense. Without moving, it's faster than the mind because it's already there. Now, on the surface, I've just explained it briefly, and you get the meaning. And it's nice when you get the meaning of this really subtle poetry. It's nice, because then you can appreciate it at such a deeper level. But here, on a surface level, doesn't it sound paradoxical? Without moving, it is faster than the mind. What is this translation? That non-dual Atman, though never, this is not my translation, we just picked this out of some book. Though never stirring, is swifter than the mind. That's not bad. How can something without moving be fast? On the surface, it sounds like a contradiction. It sounds like a paradox, something that is illogical. Now, there's something to appreciate in the teachings of Vedanta. There is nothing paradoxical in Vedanta. Now, I think this point needs to be made because there are certain spiritual traditions which actually use paradox. I'm not a big scholar of Zen Buddhism, but little bit I understand, is that one of the principles used in some of their koans is a paradox which has no real logical solution. And the purpose of the paradox is to kind of shake us out of our very rigid, linear thinking, which is a good thing. The point I'm making is there are perhaps some spiritual traditions which use paradox. Vedanta is not among them. Vedanta does not use paradox. Paradox means you can't understand it. That's the definition of paradox, right? Two things that don't fit. It cannot be understood. It's not meant to be understood. Vedanta is Shastra. Shastra means teaching. Teaching means there shouldn't be a paradox. Anything on the surface that appears to be a paradox should be resolved. Sri Shankaracharya in his commentary wants to make sure that no one gets stuck on his paradox. So in his commentary, he says, Kim virudham uchyate? He says, so suppose you say this is mutually contradictory. Virudham. It appears to be mutually contradictory. But then he says, by the way, the style of commentary is something wonderful. I just want to share this with you briefly. The style of Shankara's commentary, and not just Shankara's, many commentaries follow the style, is you introduce an opposing point of view called Purva Paksha. So here, Sri Shankara introduces an opposing point of view. He says, Katam virudham uchyate? Is this not contradictory? Dhruvam nishchalamidam manasaha javiyaha. He says, that which is fixed and unmoving, and then you say that it's faster than the mind? Is this not mutually contradictory. So first he introduces the opposing point of view, known as Purva Paksha, and then he gives the Siddhanta. The Siddhanta means his point of view, or the scripturally correct point of view. So then he replies to his own doubt by saying, Naisha doshaha, this is not a problem, this is not a defect. And this is his typical style. He first answers in 2 words, and then he amplifies those 2 words in the next paragraph. So he gives first a short answer, and then the long answer. I'll give you the short answer. Long answer I'll spare you. The short answer, and this is we're going to come back to this upadhi topic. The short answer, nirupadhi upadhi matvena upapattehe. So he can explain this complex apparent paradox with 2 words. Actually, they're long compound words, but then literally 2 words. He says, that which is nirupadhi, that which has no upadhi, and that which is upadhi mat, that which has an upadhi, in this way, upapattehe, it is possible. This is like almost shorthand. So it is possible, he says, for 2 things which are apparently mutually contradictory. It's possible for that to be so when you consider from these 2 perspectives, with an upadhi, without an upadhi. So let's use our standard example. We'll try this. I've never done this, so just try it. Try to make it sound like the verse. It can hold tea, yet it holds nothing. It can contain 4 ounces of chai, yet, it can contain 4 ounces of chai, yet it can contain everything. How's that? It can contain 4 ounces of chai. By the way, this pot has a hole in it. I don't think this one was made for chai. I think this one was perhaps made for a plant. Imagine, you make believe the hole is not there. So it can contain 4 ounces of chai, and it can contain everything. Now, that sounds like a paradox. How can we resolve this kind of language? It can contain 4 ounces of chai is with regard to the pot, with regard to the upadhi. Pot is name and form. But as you know, the pot is made of clay. Potness is nupadhi, superimposed on clay. Clay is the underlying reality. Out of clay, we could make thousands of pots. In fact, we could consider, in a manner of speaking, that the entire universe is made of clay, made of material, and just loosely speaking, made of clay. So here, we have clay in a form of a pot, which can hold 4 ounces of chai. It can hold 4 ounces of chai, yet it can hold the universe. Hold the universe is with regard not to the pot, but with regard to the clay that is its substratum. So notice then, it's really not a paradox. As Shankara explains it a little bit more technically, one expression is with regard to the upadhi. The other expression is with regard to the underlying reality. Does that make some sense? So with regard to this pot, with regard to the pot, it can hold some chai, But with regard to the clay could be considered the material because of which the universe exists. So we can speak in very different ways. So with that in mind, we come back to our text. And now we can understand that ekam, and here we're talking specifically with reference to the mind. Manasaha javiyaha, that which is faster than the mind. So when we're talking about with reference to the mind, we're probably talking about consciousness. Ekam could mean Brahman in general, that absolute reality. But in the context of this verse, ekam is really referring to consciousness, chit, or chaitanya. Non-dual Atman, it says there, but Atman is Satchidananda. Chit, consciousness. Consider this. Consciousness is manasaha javiyaha, faster than the mind, because when your mind goes to Mumbai, your consciousness is already there. How can that be so? Your consciousness doesn't have an edge or boundary. Your body has an edge or boundary. Your brain has an edge or boundary. Consciousness has no size, no weight, no edge, no limit. Consciousness is all-pervasive. So that all-pervasive consciousness is already in Mumbai. Therefore, it is manasaha javiyaha. So that is with regard to the mind. That is consciousness with the upadhi of mind. Consciousness from the standpoint of the mind is faster than the mind. But consciousness in and of itself, anejata, is unwavering, unchanging. And this bears a brief explanation. Those of you who have attended my other Vedanta classes, you've heard this expression before, that consciousness is that the unchanging consciousness, the unchanging light of consciousness that reveals all your changing mental activities. Your mind is constantly changing. In order to reveal all the changes of your mind, that which reveals the changes of your mind must necessarily be unchanging. Mind changes constantly, but the underlying consciousness doesn't. Again, upadhi and nirupadhi. This pot can change. If I throw it on the floor, it'll change very dramatically. Instead of looking like a pot, it'll look like a bunch of shards. So this pot can change instantly. When this pot changes, what happens to the clay? Utterly unchanging. So this is the poetry we're dealing with in this verse. Let's see if we can finish it. So this consciousness, this ekam, this one reality, is anejata. It is unchanging, unwavering, yet it is manasaha javiyaha. It is faster than the mind. Na etat devaha apyuvan purvam arshata. Na enat, this one. Na devaha apnuvan. This one, na apnuvan, cannot be obtained, cannot be grasped, devaha. Now, deva, you have one meaning in your mind for deva. Look it up in a dictionary, you'll find many meanings. Don't get stuck on one meaning. So deva comes from a root, which means the root is div, and it means to shine. So the devas are the shining ones. But anything else that shines can also be considered deva. So, for example, Sri Shankara explains, devaha Dyotanat devaha. Because they shine, they are called devas. What are those? Chakshuradin, Indriyani. Senses. Like sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. They shine, they illumine. How do you know I'm sitting here? There are two kinds of illumination. One is I'm illuminated by light, but the second is I'm illuminated, as it were, by your power of sight. The light shines on me, but then there has to be something going on in you. You illumine. Now this is, I don't think we want to go through this whole process of sight tonight. That's not going to be helpful. But we could say that our sense organs illumine the world around us for ourselves. Again, this is poetry. So think of your eyes illumining all the forms around you, your ears illumining, or illumining in a sense of making known. Your ears make known sounds. Your sense of touch makes known forms, textures, etc. Your sense of taste and smell make known other things. So in this sense, in this manner, the five sense organs illumine the world around us. And now we come back to this verse, which says, Devaha, those senses, na enat apnuvan. They do not illumine. Literally, they do not grasp or acquire, but in context. They do not illumine enat, this one, consciousness, the reality within. Why? Purvam arshata. Why? Because this one, Purvam arshata, went before. Poetry. What is it? Went before? What in the world are you talking about? Consciousness. The senses cannot illumine consciousness because it went before. That's a literal translation of this line. But this is poetry, right? We don't want to be too literal about it. But we need to grasp this. Let's just see something on the board here. Your mind, manas, is known to you, correct? Whatever is happening in your mind is known to you. Why? Because of consciousness. Chit. So we could say, figuratively speaking, consciousness illumines the activities of your mind. Every thought that occurs in your mind is known to you, illumined by you. Every emotion that occurs in your mind is known to you, illumined, as it were, by this consciousness. All right. But then we have these sense organs. Well, the sense organs, in fact, even in modern science, the sense organs are connected to your brain. We're wired with all these nerves. So we could say then that the senses, here they're called devas, but indriyas, the senses. How do you know what you're seeing right now? Because an image of me is collected by your eyes and loaded into your mind. Is it not so? That's how our sense organs work. So the sense organs reach out. So they're called devas because they illumine the world. Senses are called devas, the shining ones, because your senses illumine the world. But how do you know what your senses are picking up? Because the mind makes the senses work. Strictly speaking, what happens is that the senses collect that information from the world and download it, so to speak, into our minds. And then whatever is known in the mind is revealed by consciousness. So this is how perception takes place. Consciousness makes the mind work. Mind makes the senses work. Senses makes the world known to us, or we could take it in reverse. The world is acquired through the senses. The senses are acquired by the mind, and the activities of the mind are revealed by consciousness. Now, this is how it works. This is how experience works. Now this verse will make some sense. And I think we'll stop with just half the verse today. We don't want to push to finish this. So this first half of the verse ends with this second line. Na enat devaha apnuvan. Devaha, the senses, na apnuvan, do not illumine or grasp enat, this one. No, it makes sense. The senses cannot illumine or grasp this one. The senses can only illumine or grasp the world. Now it makes perfect sense. In fact, it seems so obvious, but look how poetically it's expressed. It says, this one cannot be grasped by the shining senses. That's what it says. Why? Purvam arshata, because this one went first. This one went first. Where is first? Beyond the manas, beyond the devas, beyond the world. It's already in Mumbai. It's already in Mars and a distant galaxy. This one is already everywhere. Since this consciousness is boundaryless, limitless, it pervades everything, it's already there. Definitely, Purvam Arshata, it went before, it went first. We could say it's logically first, we could say it's physically first, we could say it's Ekam. It is the one because of which everything exists. So remember what I said a few moments ago. Extremely non-systematic, extremely poetic. So we have the challenge of penetrating the poetry, but the reward. Because when you see how simple the concepts are, and then you see how beautifully the Rishi expresses it poetically. Ekam, this one, anejata, without wavering a bit, is manasaha javiyaha, it is faster than the mind. And na devaha, the senses, na apnuvan, the senses cannot grasp enat, this one. Why? This one being consciousness. Why? Purvam rishata. Consciousness goes first. Consciousness is not accessible as an object for the senses, but consciousness comes first. Consciousness is already there. Consciousness, chit, is the reality, ultimately, the reality because of which everything exists. By the way, I'm not saying this kind of loosely. You may remember that one of the 4 Mahavakyas is Prajnanam Brahma. Prajnanam means consciousness. Prajnanam Brahma. Brahman is consciousness. Brahman, the reality because of which everything exists, is Prajnanam, Chit, Chaitanya, consciousness. Okay, we'll have to wait till our next class to see the second half of this verse, and we'll conclude with our prayers. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.